Hello, and welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your hosts, Brent Aiken, David Pruitt, and Russell Martin. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now, here's your host for this week, David Pruitt.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time listening to us, we want to welcome you and invite you over to our website, studentministryconversations.org, where you can find all of our previous episodes, show notes, blog articles, and much more. Our goal here at Student Ministry Conversations is that you are inspired, encouraged, and that the things that you hear on this podcast would equip you to be a better student pastor for the church that you are serving in. All right, let's get to it. Guys, I got to tell you, this is a huge treat for me. I've had a lot of friends on this podcast, but I can truly say this is my best friend. There's like best friends, and then there's like a category above. Realized this year we have been friends for 25 years. For some people, that might be your entire life, and that's great. But yeah, we've been friends since the good old days in elementary school, and just Brandon is easily the greatest guy I know. And I say that in every way, form, and fashion. He was the best man in my wedding. He is one of the most caring and compassionate people I've ever met, which is a big part of what we're going to be talking about in our topic. But before we get to that, would love to tell you a little bit about Brandon. He's already got one master's degree. He's a grad student who is getting a second master's degree, very, very close to having that, and basically working to become a counselor. And so there's a lot to that, and I'll let him tell you about that. But please, Brandon, tell us a little bit about yourself, brother.
Yeah, hey guys. Like you said, my name is Brandon Upton. I actually came to mental health in a very different way, is what we'll call it. It was actually born out of heartbreak, I guess I could say. My life and my calling was on track to become a pastor in the United Methodist Conference and the Northwest Texas Conference. And then after, the fate of one meeting, the Lord kind of led me a different way. And I'll be honest, it wasn't a easy season by any means. But through that, I've had so many reassurances from the Lord that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And the way that I explain it to people is that I still get to be a pastor, but I get to go deeper, quicker with people than most pastors will ever get to do. And so for me, that's worthwhile because I get to know what makes people tick. And so fast forward this is year 3. Oh man. Fast forward 3 years later, I started my master's at Asbury Theological Seminary. Felt the Lord calling me back to good old West Texas. And so I'm at WT finishing up. And I couldn't be more excited just to dive in and to help reshape or reframe the way that the church views and talks about mental health.
Yeah, so kind of a note in that. I remember for the longest time, Brandon and I used to dream about every church having a person on staff, and their whole job was just pastoral care. We talk about different ministries, but one thing that a question we were asking ourselves at a pretty decently young age, I'm talking 19, 20 years old, we began to look at the church, and we saw that there's so many churches that don't have somebody who actually takes care of the pastors and leaders inside the church. Now, I realize that a lot of associates pastors, like, that is like one of their roles, but as far as having somebody who their entire job is to kind of oversee the spiritual, mental, emotional well-being of the staff on church, the leaders at their church, that was kind of a rare thing back then. I think we're starting to see more and more, especially in some of the conversations I'm having as churches are expanding. Now they have like social media pastors, which is pretty interesting, online like campus pastors in that sense too. And so I think the church is definitely redefining the traditional roles of pastors, but that's one of the big things that we used to dream a lot about. And so that kind of leads me into my first question I have for you, Brandon. Why is it important? You know, I think before we can really get into any kind of topic, we have to ask the question, why? Why is it important for us as pastors to actually consider our personal care?
That is a great question, and it's not an easy question by any means. With the stigma that still very much pervades the Western church, I say the Western church because you don't really see like this polarization or this divide, so to speak, in the churches overseas, just by what I've witnessed. But why, as pastors, we need to prioritize mental health is like, it all starts with us. Like, if we, as cliche as it sounds, if you don't make time for wellness, you're going to make time for illness. And that's why 9 times out of 10, you hear terrible stories about pastors who have they hadn't prioritized mental health, and so they have, which led them to do something terrible, which ended up in the news, and then that just hurts the witness of the church. And so, firstly, just to kind of boil it down, I think it starts with 3 things. One, we have to be honest with ourselves. Like, we have to recognize that yes, we are pastors, and yes, we are called to serve where we are. But on the flip side of that, we're called to to take care of ourselves, to be stewards of our, to make sure that just as if we have a physical ailment that's ailing our body, it doesn't make it any different if hey, I noticed that I'm not feeling happy like I used to, and this is something that I got into because I really felt the Lord kind of infuse joy into that. And so just paying attention to that, and then finding a safe place, if that's within one of your close, someone in your circle. If for those who don't know what your circle is, I would recommend, just to find at least 3 to 5 people, probably no more than 5, that you can be you with, unapologetically, and they'll love you for you, and because this world is broken, and we live in a broken world, and it's easy just to think that we either have to shoulder all of the ups and downs of our ministry on our back, when the Lord tells us, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And I think that's the part we forget about, is that we're weary and we're heavy laden, but instead of going to the Lord to give us rest, we kind of push forward because society tells us that we have to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and get it done, when in reality, the church statistics are very sobering in this fact that pastors have the highest rate of burnout per capita. You see a lot of pastors leaving, unfortunately, and so 1, be honest with yourself. 2, be honest with your leadership team. Allow them to speak into your life. And 3, be rooted in the sense, rooted in all sense of the word. Where you are, there you are, so be there. And I think the lack of being present, especially for pastors, because it's easier for us to physically be there, but our mind be like, okay, I have this, or this to get done. When in reality, the greatest gift that we can give our congregants or our parishioners is our time, is our presence, like our 100% presence of being disconnected from everything that this world tries to throw at us.
Man, that is so good. Like, man. I always take notes every time I have someone on, and the fact that you just spurted like 3 things, like, oh, Brandon, I love you, dude. Oh my gosh. You talked about this a little bit, and this is something that's probably talked about on every ministry podcast ever. It's probably the number one topic, but I think it's because it's, as you said, the number is skyrocketing right now. But pastoral burnout is at an all-time high, mostly due to the imbalance of our physical, emotional, and mental health. Why do you think it's so hard for us to actually seek out care?
That's a great question. I think part of it comes from like this false sense of feeling like we have to have it, like we have to be viewed as having it all put together, and that like, and that we have to be the strong one. There we go. I was trying to think of the words. When, in reality, the Lord tells us that, when you are weak, I am made strong. And that the most beautiful thing you can do for, your staff, your congregants, your parishioners, is to allow them in to the messy places of your life, to, to witness when the world is crashing down under us, because then those can be, voices of exhortation and raising you up when you may not have the strength to. And probably the most powerful thing that I could say kind of in conjunction with that, on why pastors don't seek out care, well, it goes back to burnout, but also it goes back to the lack of living into Sabbath, and just feeling like we have to be on 7 days a week because, ministry never sleeps.
Yeah. Brandon has been on me my entire really adult life about this, and I've always said there's no such thing as part-time ministry because there's no such thing as part-time people. And what's funny is you were always so patient and kind with me with that, but you always had this look like, okay, all right, because you could go all the time. And it was like I was so naive for so long to believe, like, and I think it's still a true statement, there's no such thing as part-time ministry because there's no such thing as part-time people. People need us all the time, but we have to realize that we are doing this together. It's one thing if I walk into, just for example, say I walk into a store and I'm the only Christian inside that entire store. There's 100 people in the store, including me. I'm one of 100 people. There's 99 other people, and I'm the only one who can present the gospel. Yeah, I can understand the urgency of wanting to work hard, but I mean, let's be completely honest. All of us are serving in a church, and there's, a typical church staff has anywhere from, I'd say 3 to maybe even 100 people on staff for the bigger churches, or more for that matter. None of us are actually going through this completely alone when it comes to church, and that's just your paid staff. Then you have your volunteer leaders. You've got your leadership board or elders or deacons, whatever you have, and then under that we have volunteers. And so, depending on your church size, I mean, you could have easily 20 people up to hundreds of people who are all on the same team. And yet, I think we carry this mentality that we're like the only ones, and we have to always be on. And at least for me, I know that's something that I'm really, really struggling with, trying to redefine balance. And so, man, you make a really good point there. What do you think, for the typical pastor, what do you think the biggest needs are, as far as like our mental health and balance and all of that? What do you think are some of the biggest pastoral needs?
Say the question for me one more time.
Let's say it might be a little broad, but what do you think are the biggest needs that pastors have when it comes to taking care of ourselves, and what are some things that we need to prioritize more?
I think probably one of the biggest pastoral needs that pastors need is like they need a safe place for themselves to be themselves, because it's hard to kind of live into that duality of like, okay, you're my congregant, you're in a high leadership team, but yes, I'm your pastor, but I need to tell you about some just some very tough things that are going on in my life. And so it's hard to kind of live into that duality, and be obedient to where the Holy Spirit is leading you and who that you're called to confide in. So I think one of the pastoral needs is they need a safe place. They need a safe place they can go. Two, I think the biggest strength for pastors is they either need someone on the pastoral care level, either on their staff, or they need to be in connection with one of them. Because I heard one of the statistics that they told us in our Masters of Divinity class for care of persons, that talked about when pastors are counseling their parishioners and walking through tough moments in their life. I think the statistic was that if you can't alleviate the issue in 3 to 5 sessions, then you need to refer out. You need to refer to somebody, to a licensed professional. But I think also that's kind of where the rubber meets the road, because I think that pastors feel like they have to fix it. When in reality, they're called to, just be them. So I think one, a safe place; two, recognizing that you're not the end all be all for people, is that, sometimes they're going to need, deeper, a deeper level of care than what you can imagine, or what you can provide. And that's okay. And just kind of leaning into that. And thirdly, I'd probably just simply say just training, in a sense, because I think that that's probably where a lot of people kind of fall to the wayside, is that most people in the church today, they don't know, the warning signs, I guess, of when, things will become a problem, or how to navigate, issues in their staff. Oh, okay, what do I do when my like when my youth pastor of like 9 years says, "Hey, I feel like I'm losing a sense of my calling that I had when I first started. Would it be okay for you if I step back for a moment to take a couple of months to kind of allow the Lord to kind of breathe new life into me?" In today's society, that would be viewed as a little nonsensical and kind of crazy. But I think that, a pastoral need is that we need that. Like, we need to be able to recognize that, like, as I said earlier, that it starts with us, and like we have to model that. We have to model that, just as Christ came down in the incarnation and he felt the brevity, the good, the bad, the ugly, depression, anger, anxiety, the full 9 yards. Just as he felt that, we feel that. And so we have to realize that, like, we have to take care of ourselves.
Yeah, that's good. That's so important. My goodness. And you made a really good point there too, because like you said, that youth pastor who's been in a position for 9 years and they need a chance to maybe take a break. For a second there, I was like, oh man, he's about to fully call me out here, because I am nearly at 10 years. I am that youth pastor who has had to take a couple of steps back on a couple of things. I went several weeks in a row just without a single day off. I mean, I think it was like a total of 6 weeks, no day off, and I was working like every week. It was like I was working more and more, and I was getting to a point of like 90-hour weeks, and I'm like, man, I don't have it physically, spiritually, emotionally. I felt like my body is like failing me, and even having this frustration of like, why can't I just go 1 more hour? But it was like my body was like, dude, I tapped out 2 weeks ago. Like, you're ignoring me, and now you're sick, and now you're real sick, and now you don't have a choice. And I have long joked and said this is kind of just my personality. I'm a bit of a workaholic, and I'm working on that. But one of the big questions I wanted to ask you going into this, Brandon, as someone who is currently working on rebalancing his life, what does that look like? For a youth pastor, children, like I believe that there are people. Yes, this is called student ministry conversations, but I believe that there's all kinds of pastors that listen to our conversations, mostly because they've told me. Whatever age and stage you're in, how do we run rebalancing, especially when we have been too far the other direction? We've taken on maybe more than, we like to joke in the church world. It's like, this is your job description, and it's like this big, and then there's a couple little words, and whatever the pastor deems necessary. And that whatever the pastor deems necessary turns into like 5 pages of work before you even know what you're doing, because it's like, oh, it's not just what the pastor deems, it's what the entire church deems necessary for you. And so now all of a sudden you're doing more than you physically have the capability of doing, but yet we feel this enormous pressure, and I would call it even like a weight of expectation to fulfill all those little things. So how do we rebalance when we've allowed things to get too much?
I think it starts with one, and this may not make sense at the beginning, but roll with me. That we have to live and be present in the moment and not in what's next. It's very easy for us in ministerial settings to be very. It sounds harsh, but I mean it's true. To be very transactional when it comes to like our schedule in the day. We're like, oh, okay, I've got, Austin's play. I've got to go to so-and-so's basketball game, and then I've got this and this. But, when you're there, you're not really there because you're thinking about, oh, okay, did I remember to eat breakfast this morning? No? Okay. But giving yourself permission to live in the moment and to temporarily leave your commitments, your responsibilities, to kind of place them to the side for a moment and allow yourself to experience what you're doing in that moment. I know that sounds kind of very new agey, but in this society that we live in, it's very fast paced and very self-gratifying. And so in that moment, it frees you up to just be you. It gives you the freedom to let off a little bit of pent up anxiety, pent up stress, but kind of in that talking about how do we balance that. I think David, I think you hit the nail on the head, is that we have to establish boundaries, that we cannot, we can't be present 24 hours a day for people because that's just not realistic. We have to kind of do a self-inventory of ourselves and, think about, okay, this is where my giftings are. This is what I'm good at. What falls outside of that? Where can I delegate to kind of free myself up for some stuff? Kind of boiling it down to what are the core components that make up my calling or my position, and what are the extra stuff that I inadvertently took on because I felt like I had to. And so, and thirdly, it's gonna be a little rough, but we're rolling with it. You have to be able to say no. Like, there have been so many ministry-minded people, myself included. Like, I fell into that I was the yes man. I was like, yeah, I'll go, set up for this. Yes, I'll do that. Yeah, of course, I'll do that. When in reality, yes, all those things are good. Helping the church, setting up for things, that's great. But in reality, when I looked back on that moment, I realized that, I was left with, talking about, emotional, mental, resources, I was left with nothing. I was burnt out. I was tired. I was, maybe a little depressed. I don't know. But just kind of allowing yourself to say no. No, am I saying no, to all things? Of course not. But just those that you want to do, but this goes back to kind of holding the two in tandem with one another, talking about asking yourself, do I have the emotional resources to fully commit to where, I think about in ministry, you have a student that comes up to you and they're like, oh, I'm just really struggling with depression or suicidal thoughts. And nothing about that. And, but without thinking about it, you're like, yeah, no, let's talk about it. Let's do it. And so, if you're not careful and you don't ask yourself those questions of that, hey, do I have the resources to, to fully commit to this? You're going to be left in probably worse care than the person that's sitting in front of you, and you're going to be harming them rather than you're going to be helping them.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that. I was actually about to interrupt, and I don't like interrupting guests, but I was about to say, because one of the most harmful things that we can do is to try to give an answer to a question that we do not have the answer to. And you know deep in your heart, you know deep in your soul, even I would say even to, you know deep in your bones that you don't have the right answer, and you know that you're not equipped. You'd have to be very you'd have to be very unself-aware to think that you can give an answer to something that you don't know anything about. Basically BSing your way. And I think there are certain things that we can probably get away with BSing. That's not one of them. When it comes to, that student that comes, we actually had that conversation last night. This is a Thursday. We had this conversation Wednesday night. And we're currently in a question series. And one of the questions I got from a student was, is it sinful to have suicidal thoughts? And it cut me right to the core. Oh my gosh. I can say I have done the research. I have fairly extensive education when it comes to dealing with suicidal thoughts and tendencies. I've done a lot of study on resources. I've walked a lot of people through those situations, and it's something that I unfortunately have more experience in than I wish I had, if I'm being honest. That's not something that anybody necessarily wants to call themselves an expert in. Even counselors, I mean, gosh, I can't even imagine from your role, like, having to basically say, hey, I am an expert in, we'll call it crisis management. And I think that's probably a good overarching term. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brandon. But that was one of the conversations that came up. And the first thing I asked myself is, do I feel equipped to be able to take on this question? And in doing so, and praying and talking to mentors and doing even more research, came to the basic realization that we needed to talk about the actual root of what leads to suicidal thoughts. I don't believe that anybody just wakes up and says, okay, it's time to do this. That's a solution to a problem that builds over time. And so we began to talk about the root of how one person gets to a place where they start to have that, that ideation, and how to counteract that. And so that's a conversation for a different podcast, but I do think it's important to consider, are you well equipped in this area? And if not, and you talked about this earlier, if you can't address it in 3 to 5 sessions, then you need to delegate out, and delegate isn't the right word, refer out. And I think, man, maybe some of the most loving things we can do is tell someone we don't know. We don't know the solution. Maybe we don't know the answer to the problem, but we're willing to help them get the resources that they need. And maybe that's the more important thing. As you said earlier, we're not the end all be all. And so if I'm not the right person to help this person, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not helping them. Maybe it's just saying, hey, let me get you connected with somebody who is better equipped to help you, and just know that I'm here, when you want to talk about it or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Man, incredible advice that you've given, Brandon. I cannot stress enough the importance of pastoral care and dealing with your mental health. I believe strongly that our mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being are all connected. And when one is weak, it begins to affect the others. And so taking the time to work on those things is really, really important. And it's something that I'm trying to learn every day. I wanted to plug a resource that I'm personally reading through. It's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. It looks like this. It's by John Mark Comer, and the idea is ultimately getting rid of busyness and reprioritizing and balancing the scale. This has been a huge resource for me. I'll plug it in the show notes. I think it's a really important book that should be talked about a whole lot more. Just a little bit on it. The premise of it is how to stay emotionally healthy and spiritually alive in the chaos of the modern world. You had mentioned Matthew 11 about giving, shouldering burdens and all of that, and that's like the first page of this book. So I was like, oh, that's cool. Yeah, incredible resource. Well, thank you guys seriously so much for listening. We would be so honored if you would share our podcast with your youth pastor friends on social media, or tag a specific episode that really stood out to you on your favorite platform by using @TalkStudentMen. Finally, if you would like to be on the show in the future, please reach out to us on social media or send us an email to podcast@studentministryconversations.org, and we would love to set up a time for you to join us. And I'll also throw this out there in the show notes. I'll have my email address on there, so that if you need to reach out to me or you would like to reach out to Brandon, I can get you guys in contact. Until next week, we hope that you guys have a really, really great week, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode. Thank you, guys.